My name is Carolina Hargreaves, and I am the founder of a regenerative platform called Norwegian Sage. I'm here in my garden in Norway, looking out on a beautiful spring day. And I'm very excited for today's session. We will be hearing from some incredible human beings that I've had the pleasure of following for a while. And I'm here on behalf of Systems Change Alliance, which is a platform where individuals and organizations are discussing solutions, practical solutions to the unprecedented economic, social, and environmental crisis that our planet is facing today. So Systems Change Alliance is unique in that it recognizes that these challenges are all interconnected and overlapping, and thus requires deep systemic change. And today we've gathered some of the people and individuals that are working on some of these issues, both in their inner and outer nature, I could say. And first out today, we have Clare Politano. Welcome, Clare. Nice to see you.
Hi, thank you.
And Clare will be talking about technology as commons. So I'm just going to briefly introduce you, Clare, and then I'll give the floor to you. So Clare is a technologist and regenerative strategist dedicated to channeling resources to heal our communities and our planet. Isn't that excellent? As a core steward of Terran Collective, Terran.io, she focuses on bioregional organizing and building technology for a regenerative future. So she's working on partnerships and product development for open source project Hylo, which is hylo.com. And this is a social coordination platform for thriving planets. So in her previous background, she's been helping build nonprofits, tech companies, and regenerative businesses with a wide range of organizations, including Regen Network, the Center for Science in the Public Interest, and the International Rescue Committee. Today, she's living in Ohlone territory in the San Francisco Bay Area bioregion, and she's been studying architecture and political science at the University of Virginia. And the title of her talk today is Technology as Commons. We are very excited to have you here, Clare, and the next 30 minutes are yours, leaving about 15 minutes for a Q&A. So I'll be letting you know about your time and opening the portal for your voice. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, just gonna get started with my screen share here. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning for those of you on Pacific time like me. Good afternoon, good evening to everyone else. I'm calling in from Ohlone territory, as it is colonially known as Berkeley, California today. And yeah, excited to be with the Systems Change Alliance, and thank you to the organizers for having me. So today I'm going to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is the commons, and especially how can we shift our technology that we all work on together and use into a commons system and understanding rather than the status quo today, and how that will unlock systems change for us. Because I believe that systems change requires this shift and requires that we look at technology as something we steward cooperatively. Yeah, so it is easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. This is a quote you may have come across, and I think it's really true. Capitalism and the extractive form of capitalism that dictates our free market these days, it seems like it's been around forever and there's nothing we can do to fight it. And as individuals, that might be true. But there are ways that we can come together and shift out of this. And that's why we're here today. All of us here that are listening, that are participating in this summit, are trying to do our part to create a thriving world, an equitable world. And these prevailing systems of capitalism are really failing us. They're not delivering the change that we need. And really ultimately taking our entire civilization down with it. So we need a way to stop feeding into the system, but all of the businesses that we run and support, the status quo is that they do feed into the system because it's very difficult to see what other choice we have. But there are other ways of meeting our needs as individuals, our needs as a community. And so that's where the commons comes in. And particularly today, I'm talking about our tools and our technologies. The tools we use define us. They really dictate how we interface with the world around us. The way a tool is designed really says how it can be used. And so if we are handed tools that are created by an extractive capitalist system, and then we're trying to use them to create systems change towards a regenerative world, that's going to be difficult, and if not impossible. And yeah, so I think it's really important that we ask ourselves when we pick up a tool to try to improve our community or organize people or do ecosystem restoration, is that tool actually designed for this? Is it going to help me? Or are there trade-offs that I'm making by using this tool? And are there harms that are going to happen when I use this tool as well? Like, is this tool actually going to help? Is it going to shift us towards a more beautiful world? Or is it holding us back in some way? And just being really circumspect about this, particularly the technologies that we choose. Because yeah, the question is, what do we want to build? And I think that the technology we choose to build a more beautiful world, it really matters. The world that we envision will be realized through technologies that themselves are helping regenerate and are on the same mission as we are. This new world will not be built by extractive technologies. And specifically, I think that we're going to create this world through technology that is a commons, and technology that is created through open source collaboration and cooperative stewardship. So before I explain what I mean by all those things, I'm going to share a little bit about kind of the current contours of the market that create technology currently. And I'm specifically talking about online technology tools. Because yeah, what's happening right now has not been helpful. So here's another quote that I love. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And this can be applied to a lot of things. Audre Lorde here was talking about white patriarchy, but it definitely also applies to our technology and to, settler colonialism, a lot of things. So this is perhaps specific to the United States, but I believe venture capital is a business dynamic that happens all over the world. So a lot of technology is very expensive to build. And a lot of technologies are funded with venture capital, where a venture firm or a wealthy investor puts in millions of dollars into a tech tool that they think is going to 10x, right, or 100x, and make a huge windfall. And that investor will get a lot of money back, and yeah, they'll be stoked. So the purpose of the system is not to create great technology, and definitely not to create technology that's going to help the world. The purpose of this system is to generate the biggest, fastest exit for the founders and the biggest profit for the investors. And so like crazy amounts of money get thrown around for technologies that like really don't have a lot of social benefit. But if the market says it's going to be valuable, then all of a sudden you have like a unicorn company that's worth 100 million or even a billion, and then it can get sold. And that's like the outcome that the system is optimizing for, just that like quick, big exit. And once that happens, the technology might be shut down, or it might be absorbed into the purchasing body. And so if there were people using it and loving it, too bad, whatever, that doesn't matter because this was never for you. So yeah, the financing of technology is really not helping us. And then once a technology is financed with venture capital, that means that there is a lot of pressure to maximize profit. And so instead of experimenting or trying out things that, you know, might not be attached to earning revenue, the company is obligated, the technology is obligated to focus on things that earn revenue and to maximize that revenue. And it's a fiduciary duty to maximize profit. And the people running a company can actually be like penalized by shareholders if they're not prioritizing profit. So how's that system going to generate technology that's actually helpful for creating a systems change? Yeah, and so the kinds of business models that arise from the system are rent seeking. So we have software as a service where a company puts a piece of software in the world and then they charge for people to use it. And it has to be closed source by definition, which means the code is hidden and no one can see it or use it or ask any questions or make any contributions to it. Because the company has to charge for it. So they believe it has to be closed. This is typically what happens. And yeah, like, so if it's a social tool, people bring their groups there, they put all of their data into this tool, and we don't have a lot of control over what our data is being used for. Yeah, in the cases of like the big social platforms, our technology, our data is actually being sold to the highest bidder and used to target us with advertising. So we are actually the product, rather than being able to use a tool that is made for us to actually help us. It is actually a tool where we are the product that is being sold to advertisers. Again, this is not a system that is going to help us create systems change. Proprietary tools like this are created in a system that is not designed for us and cannot liberate us from the systems that they are in thrall to. So instead, we need to use convivial tools. Convivial tools are a whole different paradigm shift. These are tools that are built by the users, designed by the users to meet their own needs, built by people to meet our own needs. And we decide how they will be used. Anyone using them can decide what they want to do with them. This idea is an old idea, but the idea is that by creating our own tools together as a community, it encourages creativity, self-determination, and really just access and equitability. Like anyone can shape the tool, anyone can contribute to it with their ideas and their needs and craft it to be useful to them. And this totally different paradigm really emancipates us from being passive victims, perhaps, of the free market world and the tools it decides to give us. We have a lot of power, and we can actually participate in creating the tools that we use. And I'm talking about technology today, but this isn't just for coders. There are many, many ways to participate in creating digital technologies, as well as all kinds of convivial tools around us in our world. And yeah, this is where we need to go. And I believe the future of systems change really relies on starting to look at every piece of our toolkit, and making sure that the tools in there are really, optimized for what we need. So I am talking about open source, partially for sure. And I'll explain what that is. The open source movement is necessary here, but it's not sufficient. So open source is a technology movement that it's pretty broad, but basically it means that the code is visible. Anyone can look at the code. Anyone can offer changes to the code, can make a copy of the code and use it for your own thing. And it's more of an open resource that people can contribute to and change. And there's a lot of flexibility. And this started off really as a hack on property law. And yeah, during the time when like online tools, not even, but just digital technology, even pre-internet, was really being born into this world. Companies were trying to enclose it as quickly as possible. And there were many brave engineers that did not want to see their work enclosed by the market, and created this idea of open source, especially by creating open source licenses using property law, using the IP law itself to create an actual license that said, this is specifically for people to share and for people to use, and for people to use however they want, as long as it is also in an open source way. And we started off with the general public license, which people still use. And now there's many different types of open source licenses you can put on your work that say how people can use it and share it and contribute to it. And this is great. We really, really need this. And we rely on open source technologies. Some really famous ones are Linux operating system, Mozilla, the internet browser, so many others. The technology underneath Wikipedia. And those are entire platforms that are open source. And that's really important. And then as an engineer, I'm an engineer, there are many, many different just like little libraries of code that are open source that people use and pull into projects all the time. So there's many, many levels of open source technology, and really the entire internet depends on this at this time. So this is a critical part of the movement of technologies. Okay, but just because something is open source does not mean that it's cooperatively stewarded and that there's a commons or a community overseeing how that technology is managed and what gets included, what contributions are honored, which ones are rejected. A lot of the most popular open source libraries are actually put out in the world by proprietary technologies. So for example, Facebook is a proprietary technology that puts out React, which is an open source library. And React is used, it's like hugely popular across the internet. And people can contribute to it, but there's a small group of people on staff at Facebook who are in charge of it. And there's no community input beyond people making contributions. So it's like, that's not enough, right? Like we're getting there, but open source is not enough to get where we want to go. So I'm going to offer a few tools that I think will help us get closer. So the first idea I want to talk about is the commons. And I'm sure most of you listening are familiar with the idea of the commons. And as I explain this, I'm going to draw on the work of David Bollier and Silke Helfrich, who wrote a wonderful book called Free, Fair, and Alive. Highly recommend. And the way they describe a commons is as a complex, adaptive living system that generates value. And that value can be bio wealth, it can be care wealth, it can be financial wealth. And that value helps the people who steward it meet their needs and take care of each other without having to rely on the market or a state. And a commons, as a living system, a commons really arises from many factors, but three main factors that generate a commons are a very healthy social culture that prioritizes connection and stewardship and responsibility, it relies on peer governance. So there has to be a really good structure for helping the community govern the commons and make sure that it is being built and used equitably. And then that ties into provisioning. So making sure that the resources involved in the commons are distributed equitably and put in equitably, and that the commons is protected from enclosure by the market. And this is really a radical idea, although the commons, of course, are ancient and have been around for a very, very long time. And the oldest commons we might think of would be like a forest near a village. And the forest is this abundant, rich place, and the people in the communities around it have agreements about how they will use the abundance of the forest. Like maybe you can only have, or say it's a field, you can only have a certain number of cattle grazing there. Or in the forest, you can only harvest a certain number of sacks of mushrooms. And those agreements are what maintain the health of the commons while also allowing people to benefit and have their needs met. And yeah, cultures have been doing this around the world for millennia. And a few cultures around the world to this day have commons that are bio wealth, that are grounded in nature. But this idea that arises from nature can really be used and applied to anything in our world, and should be, I think, and especially applied to the technologies we build because they impact our lives so much. All right, so the next idea here that I'll talk about is cooperatives. Again, not a new idea. So the idea of a co-op has been around for a while, thinking back to like farmers in the US, like my heritage is farmers. My grandfather was on the co-op board, and the farmers would share their equipment and they would decide on what prices they wanted to sell their goods for. And they would put their product together and bring it to the market and then distribute their returns equitably amongst themselves. So a co-op or a cooperative is an organization that is owned by the members and governed by the members, and the benefits are distributed equitably among the members. And so there's a couple ideas now that I want to share that are related to this idea of the co-op and extending it to online technologies. So the first thing is platform cooperatives is now this movement of taking these ideas and making online tools into a cooperative. And that's great because it's taking the idea of an online business and really democratizing it for the people that are involved in the business. Yeah, I mean, the vision is just that we own the websites we use and we steward them together. And yeah, companies are starting to do this, organizations are starting to do this, and it would be good if more were to do this, because imagine if we had an Airbnb or a Facebook that was actually governed by its members and there was oversight into the things that might go wrong with these platforms. Like Airbnb is starting to carve out urban neighborhoods and really shred the fabric of society. What if the people participating in Airbnb could work on that together, and we could all comment on that and contribute to that? That would be nice. So that's the idea of a platform cooperative. And then there's this idea of the open cooperative that goes one step beyond that. And here I'm drawing on the work of the Peer-to-Peer Foundation. An open cooperative goes one step beyond platform cooperatives and isn't just for online businesses, but basically an open cooperative is specifically oriented towards the public good. It's not just about an equitable system for the member owners, like a platform cooperative or a regular cooperative. It's really about everyone. So the four things that make an open cooperative is: one, that common good orientation; two, multi-stakeholder governance. So really looking at who all of your stakeholders are and making sure that they are involved and have a voice in the direction of the thing. The cooperative should actually create a commons or nurture a commons. And then there needs to be a global outlook, because we're playing in a global space right now, and what we do can have pretty big impact. So global outlook and local production. All right, so one more thing here, and then I'm going to share a little bit about what we're doing on Hylo, and then questions. So all of these ideas might sound a little abstract, but they're actually very concrete guidelines for creating a commons. And this list has been finessed and added to and contributed to many times, but these ideas originally come from the work of Elinor Ostrom, who wrote a book called Governing the Commons and did a lot of research looking at groups around the world who were successfully governing common pool resources together. And she identified the characteristics that were shared by all of these different groups. And so it's, some pretty obvious things. So the idea of shared identity and purpose, the people in the group need to know, the people in the group or the people working on a thing need to know who they are, what they're doing, why are they working on this thing. The project needs to have equitable distribution of contributions and benefits. People need to feel reciprocity by participating. Decision-making needs to be fair and inclusive. So the biggest thing is decisions, people affected by a decision need to be party to making that decision. Then transparency. So when people live up to their obligations or they don't live up to them, there needs to be transparency around that. And then accountability. So that's number 5, like graduated response to helpful and unhelpful behaviors. So whether people should be rewarded and acknowledged or given feedback and helped to improve, that needs to happen. And it needs to happen in proportion to the scale of the actions. There should be fast and fair conflict exploration. So when conflict happens, as it does in any system involving humans, that's a good thing. It means things are healthy. There should be a good container to explore the conflict and bring it to resolution, perhaps. The project needs to be able to govern itself and make all of these determinations for itself. And then it also needs to be able to relate to other groups following similar design patterns. So these design principles could be applied to anything and they would probably help. And by the way, these are filtered first from Elinor Ostrom and then through a design methodology called pro-social, which is another thing I highly recommend in terms of creating really successful collaborative groups. Like these are the principles, they arise from nature and the groups taking care of commons in nature. So they're really incredibly powerful for implementing the things that I'm talking about. Okay, and speaking of implementation, we are in a process with Hylo of putting this all into practice. So Hylo is an open source project that I'm working on. It is a social coordination tool for a thriving planet. So it is for organizing impactful action to regenerate our communities and our planet. Specifically, we're aiming to amplify collective action by providing place-based tools for social coordination. Specifically, we want to help networked groups coordinate at a larger scale to achieve shared goals for the world, for their communities. And just a few words about Hylo. We do really center the place-based aspect because we're pretty focused on helping people organize at the bioregional level. And the only reason I'm mentioning that now is because not only do we want Hylo itself to be a commons, we want it to help create other commons. We wanted to create commons in every bioregion. Like we want to help the people of a landscape remember that the land that they live on is a commons and can be stewarded in common. But to do that, you need really good tools. And so that's what we want Hylo to be. So some of the values that we're looking at as we go down our commoning process, obviously long-term thinking, doing this in relationship with the people that need to use platforms like this, doing this transparently, featuring interoperability, all of those things, of course. And then a few things I want to give more detail on our governance process. So we are in a very big exploration of like, all of this is a journey and all of this is an experiment, right? Because these are, while they're old ideas in a way, we're really applying them in a very new way and seeing what happens. And it's an experiment. And as we implement things, we're listening and iterating. So with governance, we're trying to create structure right now around how we do that stakeholder inclusion. So we have on Hylo, we have our open source community, and we have about 400 people that are participating in conversation around the software and giving feedback on designs and giving feature ideas and all of these things. And right now we're in a process of looking at sociocracy and thinking about how we can set up a system of circles to appropriately, design the realms of responsibility, and then ultimately create a really good system for receiving input from the community and listening at a big scale. Because if tools like Hylo and other cooperative technology tools are successful, we will want to be listening to thousands, if not millions, of stakeholders and hearing their voices and somehow synergizing them and then being able to act on them. And that's really the challenge right now, is like, how do we listen at that scale? And there's some things we're experimenting with, but I don't have time to go into it. And then I must touch on decentralized internet architecture, another huge piece of how do we make technology truly cooperative and a commons. We have a partnership with one distributed internet platform, Hylo, or Holochain, and our hope is to move the architecture of Hylo from being like a centralized internet architecture currently onto Holochain's distributed internet, where everyone around the world is hosting their own data and hosting pieces of the apps that they interact with. And that way it truly will become a commons, because then we're not relying on like Amazon, for example, to host, we don't use Amazon, but like a centralized hosting service. And once we have our internet technologies distributed in that way, we are really going to be rocking with our technology as a commons. So there's a lot we can do, and there's a lot we can demand from the technologies we use. Even if you're not a technologist, this is really for you, because I really do want to encourage all of you to think about the tools you're using and start expecting more and start asking for more. The technologies we use should be open to hearing from us and incorporating our feedback. And if you can, please look for technologies that are open source, that are convivial tools, and really bring the community into creating them, because truly creating systems change really relies on tools that listen to you and create what you need, not create what advertisers need or a business necessarily, but what do we need as communities and as movements. And please participate in your local commons because we need you. We need you. All right, well, I'll stop there. I think I'm about on the 30 minutes, and I would love to take questions about any of this.
Thank you so much, Claire. Your enthusiasm is contagious. So many words that I've never heard before, like convivial, and it's very, very enlightening to hear how it's infusing or being infused by natural principles, and how it's just all opening up and ready for us to partake in. And we have some questions from the audience. A couple of questions. I'll start with a question from Roshni. How do you prevent hacking and criminal activity in these open source systems that we're now witnessing this, the emergence of?
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful question. And first of all, open source does not mean that there is no security. So all of the normal security precautions that you would have, you would apply to your system, and platforms are still legally obligated to prevent criminal activity on their platform, especially in the US. That's certainly the law. So all the normal moderation tools would come into play here. Actually, we have a lot of opinions about moderation tools at Hylo. We want it to be a collective activity rather than something that like one all-powerful moderator has. But the security of the platform itself is still critical. And when you have an open source code base, you don't share like your secret keys and your API passwords and things like that. Those things are obscured and they're not shared in the public code base. So that's really, those are some of the main things. I mean, there's a lot of potential vulnerabilities, but that's one of the main things as an example that you don't share publicly. And so there are many, many, many open source tools on the internet that we use, and they, anyone can get hacked, but for the most part, just being open source does not inherently make you more susceptible.
Thank you so much. Another question, could you share a bit about the activities of the Terran Collective and what they've created for the benefit of the world so far?
Yes, for sure. So Terran Collective is a community of care and practice here in the Bay Area bioregion. And we work on many scopes of practice, and technology for thriving is one of them. And that's our work on Hylo. But we also work on community building, number one, very important. We work on regenerating the commons. So specifically working with land projects around our bioregion and helping connect them, helping increase capacity, just on the ground and off of technology, just helping channel resources where they're needed and make connections that are needed. We work on storytelling for cultural evolution, so communicating these ideas out into the world, and as well as mapping our ecosystem. And by that, I mean surfacing the actors in the regenerative community in our area, and where there is opportunities to collaborate, just bringing that closer together.
Thank you. So this is interesting. Currently, we use a lot of free online tools because advertisers pay for users' data to fund such platforms. How can we create platforms that don't sell our data, but are still affordable for people on all ranges of income to use?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's so much potential here. Really, we can be very creative here. So first of all, once we do achieve decentralization with all of these nascent, distributed technologies, then the costs of running a platform will be vanishingly small, if any. So one of the biggest costs, other than personnel, and I'll talk about that in a minute, one of the biggest costs of running an online platform is the server fees. But once we have that distributed around the world, we're not going to have to pay server fees. So that's one thing we can just cross off. As far as building the platforms, yeah, I mean, a lot of this is predicated on the idea of a different world, right? Like where we have maybe universal basic income and people are free to contribute to things that they're passionate about. And open source contributors want to just, send a little code here and there to all kinds of different projects that they care about, and like the thing gets built. So yeah, those are some things. But in the current world that we have right now, projects such as Hylo do take money to build. Like me and my team do need to pay our rent. And so we have a business model that works for us. We work with partners who pay us to build features onto Hylo that they need and that everyone gets to use. And we work with people that we're deeply aligned with in partnership. And so that's why we're able to make Hylo free, is that we work with partners who make a contribution to us, and it's basically like they're funding the creation of our commons, which is epic. We love our partners. But even in a system where there needed to be a charge, that charge wouldn't have to be for everyone, right? Like it can be a pay what you can, it can be based on, how much usage you're doing or how many people you're bringing in. You could do like a 1-for-1 model where your organization makes a contribution on behalf of your own usage as well as other people's usage that don't have that capacity. So there's all kinds of ways we can get creative here. We do not need to rely on advertising.
Mm-hmm. And I guess this also plays into the last question, which is, which cooperative means do you use to ensure that Hylo won't be compromised by being purchased? And what you just explained about the partnership model and so on might be the answer to that, but maybe you have some more inspiration for other people working with similar models.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, well, it's definitely not going to be purchased because we're just not going to let that happen. We're not going to do that. And we don't have investors. So there's not like anyone else like in control of this that could do that. We are still figuring out what kind of official corporate structure in the US is going to let us do this. And if there are any corporate structure gurus out there, please get in touch. I might have to become one to figure this out, because the existing structures that we are offered really don't help us here. In the US, you can either be a for-profit or a nonprofit, and nonprofits aren't allowed to earn their own revenue. They are by definition dependent on the market and dependent on donations from for-profits. And nonprofits can't even have members, actually. So we might have to be a business to do this, in which case we can have voting members. But there are certainly types of businesses where, ultimately the main thing is you have to just enumerate all of these things in your bylaws and in your articles as you create the business. And in certain jurisdictions in the US, you can become a benefit corporation and things like this, where you are specifically prioritizing the mission of the organization in the bylaws. And so you are actually, you get to bypass the fiduciary duty to maximize profit, and you are able to maximize the public good goals of the organization and then not be penalized by that. But we don't intend to ever have shareholders that can try to enclose this, is the main thing.
Thank you so much. So what can we do, the audience today who's watching this, to support your work? Is there anything we can do right now after your talk to maybe ignite some more action or spark some more change?
Yeah, I think I would really just want to invite people to really think about the digital tools you choose to use. Are they designed for you? Are they helping you? Are they listening to you? And try to find tools that are. And I guess if I can just indulge in a moment of self-promotion, check out Hylo, hylo.com. And we'd love to work with all of you and help you create systems change. That's why we're here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Claire. That was very enlightening. I hope that we will hear more from you, or I'm sure we will in some way or another. You might be the next corporate governance guru to go to. So thanks for joining us today. I hope you stay on for the other speakers, and it's been a pleasure to listen.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care.